Get your donuts, get your coffee, welcome. This is week 15 out of 24. And by the way, a couple of guys commented on the weather. I guess it started snowing outside. I didn't see it snowing when I got here. It's not quite as cold as it was like a couple of days ago, but somebody said to me, hey, can you do something about this weather? And I always give the same answer my dad used to give, who was a pastor. When someone asked him something like that, hey, can't you do something about this weather? He'd always say, well, I'm in sales, not management. So can't help you there. But welcome today. We're going to get started. Let me talk about one announcement today really is the little flyers on your table about the upcoming couples event here at our church, FBCG. It's called Filled to the Brim. It's Saturday evening, February 6th, right here in this room, 7 o'clock. It's about 2 hours. It costs $10 for a couple, and I guarantee you can't make a $10 investment that does any more for your marriage than this one will. Your wife will have fun. There'll be a lot of people here. It'll be a full room. So take her out to dinner, make it a date night. Engaged or married couples, I think you'll enjoy it. You'll be encouraged. She'll be encouraged, and it's a great way to spend $10. You can't even see a movie. In fact, you can't get the popcorn for a movie for $10. So come here and join us. We'd love to have you for that event. Now, I've really struggled the last couple of weeks. I was trying to go with the old pun jokes and stuff, and you guys were sending them to me, but I found out you really don't like those very much. So I'm gonna take a turn. I have about 10 more, but I'm gonna go away from that. We're gonna try something else today. So. Hey, don't get out ahead of yourself here. All right. Joe was just an ordinary guy. Wife, kids, moderately successful in his career. But as he got older, he was increasingly hampered by excruciatingly painful headaches. Eventually, the headaches affected his career and his relationships, so he decided to get medical help. After being referred from one specialist to another, he finally came across a doctor who could identify his problem. The doctor said, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is I can cure your headaches. The bad news is it will require a bilateral orchiectomy. What? What's that, he said. Well, in layman's terms, that's castration. You have a very rare condition which causes that particular part of your anatomy to press up against the base of your spine. The pressure creates one heck of a headache. The only way to relieve the pressure is to perform a bilateral orchiectomy. Joe was, of course, both shocked and depressed. He wondered if he had anything to live for after the procedure to remove that particular part of his anatomy. Yet he decided he had no choice but to go under the knife. The headaches just had to cease. When he left the hospital after his surgery, the headache was indeed gone, which is an incredible relief. But naturally, he felt like he was missing an important part of himself. He felt like an entirely different person. He was walking past a men's clothing store and thought, I'll buy a new suit. Maybe that'll cheer me up. He entered the shop and told the salesman, I'm looking for a new suit. The salesman eyed him briefly and said, let's see, size 44 long. Joe was impressed. Yeah, that's right on. How'd you know that? It's my job to know, said the salesman. Joe tried on the suit and it fit perfectly. As Joe admired himself in the mirror, the salesman said, how about a new shirt? Joe loved how he looked in the suit, so he said, okay, sure. The salesman eyed him and said, let's see, 34 sleeves, 16 neck. Joe was impressed again. That's exactly right. How'd you know? It's my job to know, said the salesman, very matter-of-factly. Joe tried on the shirt. It fit perfectly. As Joe adjusted the collar in the mirror, the salesman asked, how about some new shoes? Now, Joe was, by this time, feeling really sharp and good about himself, so he said, absolutely, new shoes. Salesman eyed Joe's feet, and let's see, 9 wide. And Joe was astonished. That's right again. How'd you know that? It's my job to know, said the salesman. Joe tried on the shoes, and they fit perfectly. Joe walked comfortably around the shop, and the salesman asked, okay, how about a new hat now, just to finish it off? Without hesitation, Joe said, yeah, go for it. The salesman looked at Joe's head carefully and said, let's see, I'd say 7 5/8. Joe was incredulous. That's right, man, how do you know all this stuff? It's my job to know, reiterated the salesman. The hat fit perfectly. By this time, Joe's looking at himself in the mirror and feeling great. The salesman asked, how about some new underwear? Joe hesitated for a second and said, well, okay, sure. Salesman stepped back, eyed Joe's waist, and said, let's see, 36. Joe laughed, I know, got you there. I've worn size 34 since I was 18 years old. Salesman shook his head, no, I can't give you a 34, way too tight. In fact, there's a good chance 34s will give you one heck of a headache. Not sure that's worth the whole trip. At the end of the day, the legacy of man's life. We've been talking about that all season long, and I couldn't help but think, the NFL playoffs going on, they're in the Final Four, and this weekend, there's a big game between the Broncos and the Patriots. And inevitably, the sports writers and commentators and stuff are going to talk about legacies. They're going to talk about the legacies of Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. and they're going to talk about, well, whoever wins this game, will they enhance their legacy or will they tarnish their legacy? It's all about legacy. And so far, we've been talking about what a true legacy is, the things we leave behind that are worth more than anything else, the true wealth of our lives. And I'll tick through some of the topics so far. We've talked about the legacy, faithfulness, love, courage, strength, truth, generosity, goodness, mercy, wisdom, prayer, perseverance, integrity. Last week, the legacy of humility. And today we're going to talk about the legacy of authenticity. This word authenticity. And to introduce the topic, I chose a short clip from the film that Denzel Washington made a couple years ago called Flight, about the pilot. How many of you saw Flight? Anybody see it? Well, I didn't see it for a long time, but then I finally did it. It's really a pretty powerful movie. Basically tells the story of a pilot who is extraordinarily gifted, but he's also a closet alcoholic. In fact, it's getting worse. He has a terrible accident, during the accident he performs heroically as the pilot, but in the whole investigation after the accident, they discovered that he'd been drinking before, during the flight, and so he's basically convicted and take away his wings, and he's in prison. So the scene you're going to see is that right at the end of the film, he's been in prison for some time, he's now sober, and he's visited by his estranged son. And so let's watch the clip.
Whitaker, you got a visitor.
You have 40 minutes.
Okay. That's you, boy. How you doing? Good. You look good. Come on, sit down. This is a surprise. You get that gift I sent you?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, I got it.
You like it?
Yeah.
Good. How's your mom?
Oh, she's all right. My college counselor wanted me to come and interview you.
Me?
Yeah, I'm writing essays for college applications.
Good.
I need your help.
You got it.
And this the essay that I have to write, it's called The Most Fascinating Person That I've Never Met.
Okay.
So, who are you?
That's a good question.
It's a pretty good film if you get a chance to watch it. It's hard to watch, but it's one man's journey toward what I would call authenticity. We're going to read Psalm 51 today, one of the most well-known psalms in the Bible. It's printed in your book. But before we do so, let me give you a little background. We talked about King David a couple of weeks ago when we talked about integrity, because early in David's life, he was an extraordinary young man. He rose to position and power in ancient Israel, from a shepherd boy to the great warrior who killed the giant Goliath on the battlefield. He eventually becomes the heir to the throne, refuses to kill Saul, even though Saul's crazy, even when he has the chance to do so. Remember, he cut off the hem of his robe and respected God's timing and all that. Man of extraordinary wisdom and integrity early in his life. However, once he became king, he had an incredible run of success and victory, became incredibly wealthy and powerful, and then the story takes a turn. We're told at some point in the Old Testament that at the time when kings go out to war, David stayed in Jerusalem. In other words, he let his generals go fight his battles for him eventually, and he stayed back home in his palace. And it says he got up from his bed one evening, which is weird. Why are you in bed during the day, getting up in the evening? Well, he was bored with his life. He's taking naps. He's walking on the palace roof. He sees a woman bathing. You know the story. Her name is Bathsheba. He likes what he sees, and as king, he has this extraordinary power and influence to take what he wants. So he summons Bathsheba. She comes, and he sleeps with her. It's a very old story. It's a powerful and wealthy man getting bored with his life, feels entitled to a little pleasure, a little fun, finds a younger woman who makes him feel that old fire again, and she gets pregnant, and David has a problem. He's king. He's got a woman who's not his wife, pregnant, and she's got a husband who's fighting out in the battles for him as king. So he calls her husband, who's got one of the great names in the Bible, Uriah the Hittite, and he comes back home. He calls him home to give him a little R&R, hoping that he'll go home to his wife, sleep with her, so he'll think the baby is his. That's David's plan. Okay? But Uriah is a faithful soldier. He's faithful to his men on the field. He thinks that would be disrespectful, so he doesn't go into his home. He sleeps on the porch of his home. David finds out, so he tries again. This time, the next day, he gets Uriah the Hittite drunk with a lot of wine, hoping that once he's had a lot of wine, then surely he'll go into his wife, sleep with her, and think the baby is his. But even when he's drunk, Uriah does not disrespect his men by going into his wife when they're still fighting on the field. So now David's angry and frustrated, so he sends Uriah back with orders that are sealed to give to the general to have himself put on the front lines where he is killed in battle. David then takes Bathsheba as his own wife. Fast forward, Nathan the prophet, who serves the king, confronts David with his sin. And then David confesses. He has no choice. He confesses what he's done. And part of that confession is this Psalm 51 that we're going to read right now. So look at it. Let me read it for you. Psalm 51. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Against you and you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. So you are right in your verdict and justified when you judge. Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Yet you desired faithfulness even in the womb. You taught me wisdom in that secret place. Cleanse me with hyssop. Now that's a funny word. It refers to a plant in that area used in cleaning garments. And I will be clean. Wash me and I will be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquity. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. Skipping down to the end then. You do not delight in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. You, God, will not despise. Now, this is the most well-known psalm, one of the most well-known psalms in the entire Bible. It could be used to teach confession. It's a beautiful psalm of confession or humility, or even to teach about God's unfailing grace. It's all of that, but today I want to use it to focus on this word authenticity. The first thing I want to talk about today is the legacy of authentic faith, an authentic faith. I was raised in a pastor's home, the oldest of three boys. I was a good kid. Did what was expected of me pretty much through my growing up years and on into high school, small church, small community. Went on to college, and then after college went to Europe for a year. So during those college years and the year I spent in Europe away from my family and parents, I went through some of the things, some of the struggles, some of the wrestling that many young men go through about my faith and about how I wanted to live, who I wanted to be, and all sorts of things. I didn't go through dramatic rebellion, but I went through sort of private, personal questioning and stuff. So I got to be about age 25, still single, going through grad school, had a call to ministry. But at some point, I just felt like I needed to square some things up with my dad because of his role in my life. So I wrote him a letter, an old-fashioned letter back in those days, basically just saying, Dad, I've always respected you. You and Mom raised me a certain way, and I just feel like I want you to know that I'm not a perfect son. I haven't always been maybe what you think I've always been. And I didn't go into detail, but just I kind of needed to get that off my chest. And I got a letter back from him where he said, I know that. And he said, that's okay. I love you regardless. And he said, furthermore, I don't think I've let you see my failures enough. So in that little interchange, it was significant to me and to us because we were two men, one older, one younger, looking for authenticity, looking for an authentic faith, trying to be authentic, looking for an authentic relationship between the two of us. And that's significant. And David's psalm is really a letter of confession written to God. It's a confession of extraordinary authenticity. Look what he says, "For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Against you and you only have I sinned, done what is evil in your sight." He doesn't make excuses. He doesn't say, well, she trapped me. She's out there. She knew I was watching. I only did what any guy would do. He doesn't make excuses. He doesn't say, I had a lapse in judgment. I made a mistake. We hear that a lot today. He said straight up, I have sinned. That's my sin. I did what is evil. No wiggling out of responsibility. Despite his failures, David knows that there is no spiritual life without authenticity. Now, what's authenticity? It's kind of a buzzword today. Everything needs to be authentic. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie The Revenant yet. I went to see it. It's a kind of a good guy movie. I told somebody there's not 20 seconds of that movie my wife would enjoy, but I really enjoyed most of the movie, saw it with my boys. But that director was truly invested in authenticity. It took them 9 months to film that film because he only used natural light. He refused to use any artificial lighting. So they were in like Canada or in Argentina, and there were only like an hour a day when they could actually film. So it was one scene a day. So it would look authentic. I saw a commercial yesterday on TV that advertised authentic cheese. They used the word authentic, real cheese. Like I don't know, I guess so it's not the stuff that comes out of a can or whatever. So authentic. People use phrases like being real, be true to yourself. And that's true. Authenticity is being truthful to and about oneself. But that's only part of it from our perspective today. Because you can be true to yourself and be a world-class knucklehead, right? Remember Dennis Rodman? People like that? Just being true to myself, man. You can use that as an excuse for all kinds of stuff. Well, from our perspective, my perspective, from a Christian or spiritual perspective, authenticity is also being truthful about God's truth. Jesus gives a couple examples of this in Luke chapter 18 in the New Testament. Let me read these for you. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. Here's Jesus' story. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus, God, I thank you I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, even like this tax collector here. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. I actually preached on this text a couple of weeks ago here at our church when I was talking about prayer. Jesus tells a story here about 2 men. The Pharisee in that day would have been seen as a very religious man, leader in the community, very aware of his reputation, would have been seen as a righteous man. The tax collector would have been seen as exactly the opposite, irreligious, corrupt, hated by his community. Jesus' audience would have been thinking, Pharisee, good guy. Tax collector, bad guy. But Jesus has a surprise for them in this teaching. He flips the script. He's challenging their assumptions about what it means to be religious. It's actually the Pharisee, the one who thinks he's religious, who is farthest from God. And it's actually the tax collector who knows what he is, knows exactly what he's done, who's actually closest to God, and the one who goes down to his house justified or forgiven. He's illustrating 2 approaches to God. One is proud, religious, a good man in the worst sense of the word, as Mark Twain once said. This is a man pretending to care what God thinks about him, really wanting to be superficially religious, pretending to be religious. The other approach is humble, honest, and authentic. Honest about himself, honest about God, real, and therefore establishes an authentic relationship with God himself. So, the legacy of authenticity is where spiritual life begins. And secondly, I want to talk about the legacy of authentic relationships. Authentic faith leads to authentic relationships. Remember the story a few years ago about that Notre Dame football player with the fake girlfriend? His name was Manti Te'o. He's in the NFL today. You don't hear much about him, but he's playing in the NFL. Well, it appears that he was tricked into thinking an online relationship with a woman, he thought was a woman, was real, and she eventually had a car accident, got cancer, and died. He had never met her, but it was all online. It was a huge national story, and everybody was feeling sorry for this guy who's going through this pain and this girlfriend. And then we find out it was just a guy pretending to be a girl. So Manti Te'o became the punchline of a joke, the guy with the fake girlfriend. Well, I met with a woman recently in our church who told me a story where she met a man on a Christian dating website. A lot of people meet that way these days. It's not unusual to hear anymore. And when they arranged to meet at a restaurant, it was a woman. And the woman said something like, are you angry? Does this change things? She was like, yeah. You know, like what are people even thinking? We laugh at those examples, but they're only the most obvious examples of inauthentic relationships that happen all the time. 3 things about the gospel that are really important to acknowledge here. First of all, the gospel, or that's the word we use that means the good news of Christ, what he's done for us. The gospel allows us to be honest about who we are. Jesus tells the story about the Pharisee and the tax collector to tell us something about ourselves, to tell us something about God. He's telling us we are either one or the other. We're in the story. You're either a Pharisee pretending to be good, pretending to be religious, pretending to be justified before God, or you're a tax collector and you know exactly who you are before God, and you're honest about it. We're only one or the other. You know we're in between. And God is who God is. And God doesn't want religious activity. He doesn't want religious behavior. He wants honesty. He wants our hearts. It's what David meant in the psalm when he says, "You do not delight in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings." Those were ancient religious practices. That's what you did when you wanted to try to please God. You brought sacrifices and you gave them to him. David says, I know now you don't want those things. You don't care about those things if my heart isn't attached to them. My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. You, God, will not despise. And we can afford to be honest about ourselves because the gospel also allows us to be authentic with God. We can be authentic about ourselves, and we can be authentic with God because, David says, have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Now, here's what most people, I want to be fair here, but I think most people in our culture think about Christianity or religion backwards. Most people, their default mode is they think it's about, okay, if I go to church, if I do the religious things, if I take communion, if I give my money, if I serve a little bit, if I try to be the best person I can be, then at the end of the day, God will be pleased and will offer me his grace. That's the way most people think about religion. You do, and if you do enough, then God will give you his grace. Because that's how we are with people. That's how we think as human beings. But that's not Christianity. That's not the gospel. The gospel is Jesus comes all the way to us, all the way to where we are. He gives us his grace for nothing. It's free. It's absolutely done. The cross has already happened. Every sin you ever committed or will commit is paid for already. All you have to do is trust it. So grace happens first, and then he leads you through a process of transformation to take you to where he wants you to be. You see it? It's backwards. The gospel is upside down religion. That's why we can afford to be authentic. That's why we can afford to be honest about who we are and what we've done. And because God has unfailing love. His grace covers everything. He just wants our hearts. And then, therefore, the gospel allows us to be authentic with others. We don't have to pretend we're something we're not because the gospel tells us that God accepts us as we are and takes us where he wants us to go. And that leads us to the third point today, the legacy of an authentic life. Authentic faith leads to authentic relationships, which leads to an authentic life. In the movie clip at the end, it's a painful moment, but the son asks his father, "So, who are you?" Simple question. Who are you? It's a beautiful moment in the film, and it always makes me sort of tear up because I have sons. And sometimes I think they would like to ask the same question. So, who are you? The son doesn't want to settle for an idea of his father. He doesn't want to settle for what his father has always pretended to be. He wants to know his father. He wants an authentic relationship. He wants to look at an authentic life. Who are you? What do you think? What do you want? What do you love? What do you feel? What do you fear? What do you regret? One more story from Jesus' life. Mark chapter 10. And as he, Jesus, was setting out on a journey, a man, sometimes it's called a young man, ran up and knelt before him and asked him, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone. You know the commandments: do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not defraud, honor your father and mother," referring to the 10 Commandments. And he said to him, "Teacher, all these I have kept from my youth." Now, pause there for a second. You get the scene? Guys come, Jesus is his traveling rabbi. He's got this reputation of being a man of God. So this young guy comes up to him, kneels down. "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Seems like he's really interested. Jesus says, "Here are the commandments. You know what they are." And the guy says, "All these I've kept from my youth." You see it? Really? All of them? Every single one of them? Every single day of your whole life? You're basically the young guy saying, I've actually been perfect. I've been perfect. I've done all this stuff. You see the view he has of himself? So look at what Jesus says next. And Jesus, looking at him, loved him, had compassion on him, and said, "You lack one thing. Go sell all that you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me." Disheartened by the saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Now, why is this a story about authenticity? It's a story about a lot of things, but why use it here? See, I think that this young man who approaches Jesus is only pretending to be interested in God. He's only pretending to know what God wants from him. He's already decided he's good enough. He's already decided that he's perfect. He's already decided God is blessed to have him in his world. Right? He's already decided all that. He's really just interested in justifying himself and proving how good he is. Why does Jesus tell him to sell all he has and give to the poor? Is Jesus telling him and us that we can only get to heaven by if we give enough money to the poor? No, that's not what Jesus is saying. In the whole context of the New Testament, Jesus is telling him to do this because he's challenging the man to identify his God, small g. He's challenging this man to identify what and who he really worships. He knows the young man is pretending. That's why he loves him. He has compassion on him. He knows that by pretending, this young man has sacrificed his own soul. Because when you pretend to be good, you can't receive the grace and forgiveness of the God who really loves you. He's pretending. He can't have an authentic faith. He can't have authentic relationships. He wants this man to be honest and authentic about who he is and what he worships. He wants the man to be confronted with the truth about himself and the truth about God, because only when we do both can we leave a legacy of authenticity. Here are the questions I want you to deal with around the tables today, and I want to explain them a little bit to you. First is, was personal authenticity encouraged or discouraged in your family growing up? How about in your church? So basically the question is this: was it all about appearances as you grew up, even religion? Was it about appearances, or was it about authenticity? Were you allowed to doubt? Were you allowed to be honest about those things? Secondly, in what ways have you been able to share your personal doubts or struggles with faith with your own children? We'll start with children, whether they're young or whether they're grown. In what ways have you been able to reenact that scene in the film, Who Are You, with your own children? If you don't have kids, maybe you're with your wife, or maybe with your best friends. To what degree have you felt free to be, in some ways, authentic in this area of your life with others? And talk about that. So start with how you were raised. Was it about appearances or was it about authenticity? And then today, have you been able to do that? Have you been able to break some of those barriers of authenticity with the people most important to you? So get some coffee, get a donut, talk about it. We'll wrap you up right before 7 o'clock.